Everyone wants dramatic change. A new routine, a new body, a new mindset, a new life. But dramatic change almost never lasts. Not because you're lazy, not because you lack discipline, but because your brain resists sudden identity shifts. The mind doesn't fear effort. It fears instability. This is where the 1% rule changes everything. The 1% rule is simple. Instead of trying to transform your life overnight, you improve by just 1% consistently, not 50%, not 10%, just 1. And psychologically, that makes all the difference. Your brain is wired for survival, not transformation. When you attempt massive change, your nervous system interprets it as threat. New habits mean uncertainty. Uncertainty means potential danger. So the brain fights back. That's why motivation spikes, then collapses. That's why discipline feels exhausting. That's why most people quit within weeks. But 1% improvement doesn't trigger resistance. It feels safe, small enough to ignore, but powerful enough to compound. If you improve 1% every day, mathematically you don't just grow gradually, you multiply. 1% better every day for a year doesn't make you 365% better. It makes you 37 times better. That's not motivational talk, that's compounding. But the real power of the 1% rule isn't mathematical, it's neurological. Every time you complete a small improvement, your brain releases dopamine. Not from achievement, but from progress. Progress is addictive, and small wins create sustainable dopamine cycles. Massive goals create pressure. Tiny progress creates momentum. Most people fail because they try to change behavior before changing identity. The 1% rule flips that. When you improve by 1% consistently, your identity slowly updates. You don't become disciplined in a day. You become the type of person who does slightly difficult things daily, and that subtle shift is permanent. Consider this. Reading 1 page per day feels pointless, but it removes resistance. After 1 page, 2 pages feels natural. After 2, 5 feels manageable. Before you know it, reading becomes normal. The brain adapts to consistency, not intensity. Intensity is emotional. Consistency is structural. This is why people who go all in burn out. They rely on emotional spikes, but emotion fluctuates. Structure compounds. The 1% rule also eliminates perfectionism. When the goal is massive, you delay starting. When the goal is microscopic, starting feels stupidly easy, and starting is everything. Motivation does not create action. Action creates motivation. 1 push-up per day sounds ridiculous, but it builds a pattern. And patterns shape identity. Identity shapes behavior. Behavior shapes life.
Ow.
The 1% rule works because it bypasses ego.
Ow.
There's nothing impressive about it. No dramatic announcement. No visible transformation in week 1. And that's exactly why it works. Your ego doesn't sabotage small changes. Your fear doesn't resist tiny effort. Your excuses lose power. Most people underestimate compounding because results are invisible early. The first weeks feel pointless. But exponential growth is invisible until it isn't. That's the psychological trap. People quit before the curve rises. They judge the process by early results. But the 1% rule rewards patience, not excitement. It builds quiet confidence. Another reason this rule works is cognitive load. Your brain hates decision fatigue. If you commit to small improvements, your decisions simplify. Instead of asking, should I train for an hour? You ask, can I improve slightly today? That question is easier to answer, and easier answers get executed. Over time, your standard shifts. 1% becomes normal, then 2% feels acceptable. But it happens organically, not forcefully. That's how real discipline forms, not through pressure. Through familiarity, there's also an emotional benefit. Small progress restores control, and control reduces anxiety. When life feels overwhelming, huge goals feel impossible. But small improvements restore agency. One small act says, I'm not stuck. That message matters. The 1% rule also protects against failure identity. If you miss 1 day, it doesn't collapse the system. Because the system isn't extreme, it's forgiving. And forgiveness sustains momentum. All or nothing. Thinking destroys growth. Gradual thinking sustains it. Here's the deeper truth. The 1% rule isn't about productivity. It's about psychological safety. You're telling your brain, we are changing, but slowly, calmly, safely. And when the brain feels safe, it stops resisting. Transformation then becomes natural, not forced. People admire dramatic globes, but real change is invisible. It's choosing slightly better food, slightly more focus, slightly less distraction, slightly earlier sleep, slightly more honesty with yourself. These aren't impressive individually, but together, they rewrite your trajectory. The world celebrates intensity, but intensity is unstable. Slight improvement is stable, and stability builds power. If you feel stuck, overwhelmed, or behind in life, don't attempt a new identity tomorrow. Improve by 1% today. Not because it sounds good, but because your brain will allow it. And what the brain allows, you can sustain. The 1% rule doesn't promise overnight success, it promises inevitability. And inevitability is stronger than motivation. Because when something becomes inevitable, you stop negotiating with yourself. You just continue. 1%. Again and again. Till one day, the person you used to be feels unrecognizable.